So I was informed this morning that this is being recorded, and it reminded me when I was giving a presentation at a tech center, I might have made a couple of offhand comments about the State Department of Education, which I'm inclined to do. And then I realized when I saw the camera, I was like, oh, I'm just joking. Um, this is actually my 31st year practicing law. Been at the firm since 2001, and Andrea's not here, is she? No? Okay. Well, Andrea trained me, and every time I see her in the back of the room, it makes me very nervous. So, but I'm glad to be here today. I'm the lead special education attorney at the firm. It was a busy year last year. I had 3 due process hearings, 2 appeals, temporary injunction hearing, 2 temporary injunction hearings to keep special needs students from coming to school because they were a danger. Now I got another appeal in federal court in Oklahoma City. So I'm really hoping that this year is going to be much quieter than last year. But when Ms. Keene contacted me, Mr. Hine contacted me about coming to talk to you all. There were some things that they wanted me to cover. I've got 2 hours, and somebody in the office joked that we could do 2 hours without a presentation. So I'm going to go over what I think are some highlights and some things that I routinely see as issues, give you some guidance. I'm going to drag you through a little bit part of the implementing regulations to the IDEA. So we have the IDEA itself, which is codified at Title 20 of the United States Code, Section 1400 et al. And then we have the regulations, which are in the Code of Federal Regulations in Part 300 in Title 20. So the regulations, if you have questions about the IDEA, the place to go is to look at the regulations because they're much more detailed than the IDEA itself. It's kind of the framework, and then the implementing regulations are the ones that really give us a lot of information. So you'll see references to both of those today. If you all have questions, it's not uncommon when I give presentations like this that people look at me and go, "You were just dead wrong." So stop me, ask me if you have a question. Hopefully we'll have a little time for those of you all who have ever watched Park Talk. That was a radio program on the NPR. They had a bit at the end of each segment called Stump the Chumps. And so I'm more than happy to play Stump the Chump. If I dodge and hem around your question, it's because I'm thinking. So and figuring out how to avoid answering your question. So we'll check this clicker. All right, so the topics that kind of determined to be covered today, I want to talk about child find and evaluations. I want to talk about pre-staffing of meetings, determination of educational services, least restrictive environment considerations, timely reviews of IEPs, accommodations both in the classroom and on state testing, and if we have time, discipline, because I understand I have a lot of administrators here, correct? All right. I could spend an entire day on discipline just by itself and taking through various examples. And I will probably interject throughout my presentation war stories of past cases, things done well, things done poorly, and how best to protect yourselves. But let me just first start off by saying, I know you all are in it for the money, it's not about the kids, so we'll operate under that assumption. But thank you all for doing what you do. Child find and evaluations. So where you see these little references that say section 300, that's from the CFRs. These are the implementing regulations to the IDEA. Basically, child find is an obligation that the school district has to go out and find kids who may need special education and related services. You know, the obligation can come from a parent saying, hey, I want to have my kiddo evaluated, or hey, my child's struggling, I don't know what the issue is, I read about this thing on the internet called the IDEA, so that's where I want them. It can come from district personnel saying, look, we've got an issue with a student, we don't know why this is, we've tried various interventions during the school year, and they're just not working for the kiddo. It can come from, our good friends in Kansas City from the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights likes to remind us that a pattern of absences for of a student may very well trigger child find obligations. You know, why are they not coming to school? What is occurring? Are they having problems in the classroom? Do they feel overwhelmed? All these things can trigger child find. And as part of the district's child find obligations, you will see notices posted periodically throughout the community saying, hey, does your child have a disability, or do you believe your child has a disability? If so, let us know. And talks a little bit about the IDEA. It's really anything that puts a parent or the district on notice that the child may need special education services. Okay? Of course, if the parent knows about it and doesn't tell us about it, then how do we know about it? But just realize that this is an affirmative obligation on behalf of the district. So this is not a time to be quiet. Better to refer the child for an eligibility determination and start the ball rolling. Initial evaluations. So if you ever look at the regulations to the IDEA, it says that you have to conduct the initial evaluation within 60 calendar days of receiving informed parental consent for the evaluation. This is actually the signed parent consent. Fortunately, in Oklahoma, we have an exception. And the exception is that we have to conduct the evaluation and have the eligibility determination within 45 school days of receipt of parent consent. And you'll see a reference in parentheses to PNP. That means the Policies and Procedures Manual. So they're really, it is the Bible for special education. It's available online, and it's, I don't know, 300 some odd pages. But that is what the State Department is relying upon and looking at as their interpretation of the federal laws. And as to any uniqueness in Oklahoma with regard to this. So when you see that little reference, PMP, it just means Special Education Policy and Procedure Manual. And the reason I put this in there is because I will be happy to make this presentation available to Ms. Keene as a PDF, so if you guys want it, just reach out to her. So Oklahoma's really nice. We have 45 school days. That is pretty much a hard limit in time period for us to conduct the initial evaluation and to have the eligibility determination. There are a couple of instances when it won't apply. And it won't apply if a parent repeatedly fails to produce the child for evaluation. So we'll get into this here in a little bit, but there are comprehensive components to an evaluation under each of the IDEA's 13 disability categories. We had a parent who, as part of the evaluation process for their child, was required to complete a number of evaluation tools to be considered. And the parent never provided them. Or if the parent never provided them to the district. Of course, the parent said, I mailed it to the district, you guys didn't receive it. Since you've lost it, I'm not going to do it again. And all of a sudden, we had an issue, we couldn't comply with this 45-day period because we never could have a comprehensive evaluation of the child. And I'll explain a little later why that's important. So just know if the parent refuses to present the child, it can lead to non-application of the 45-day period, or if the student enrolls in a new school after the evaluation's done, or has been started, but before the eligibility determination. And when I'm talking about the eligibility determination, I'm talking about the MEADS meeting. And so, I don't mean to bore you all with this. Special ed lawyers are kind of like the military. We speak in acronyms. So if I'm using an acronym that you don't know or you're not familiar with, stop me, let me know. I'm kind of assuming that you all do, but I would no doubt periodically go through and just say what that is. But the determination is made on a document called a multidisciplinary evaluation and eligibility group summary, and we use the initials MEADS with regard to it. So that's what we're talking about as the eligibility document. A child has to go through the initial evaluation process before the child can be determined eligible under the IDEA. And as we said a little bit before, a parent or a district can make a referral for an initial evaluation of a child. So there are some other processes involved here with regard to review of existing data and like, but for the purposes of today, I'm not going to really get into that. So in two State Department documents or publications, the evaluation and eligibility handbook, as well as the policies and procedures manual, there is a listing of all the IDEA disability categories. And for it, there are required components of a comprehensive evaluation. I just pulled this one out for autism, because I don't know how many times I have talked to districts and they said, yeah, mom brought in a note from her doctor written on a prescription pad that child has autism, needs IEP, OT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech language services. To which I'm like, awesome, that is just great. I'm glad that they did that. A medical diagnosis doesn't constitute an evaluation for autism. Autism has all of these various domains that are associated with the IDEA disability category. If you'll notice in there, there's none of it that says medical prescription. Okay? Now, I doubt that the local physician's assistant or APRN, I think, or the MDDO, I doubt that they have looked at communication and language evaluations, academic achievement, intellectual, cognitive, developmental, social, emotional, and the like. But these are all the required components. There are also suggested or as needed additional components for an evaluation, and they list them for you. So when you get parental consent from a parent for an evaluation, there is a form that says check the various boxes and there are the various domains, and they look like this: developmental, social, emotional, behavior, adaptive behavior, background, communication, language. All of those domains on the consent that are required for an evaluation need to be checked off. And consent needs to be given with regard to those. Because one of the biggest things that I've seen is I don't see I don't see all of these checked, and I see eligibility determinations being made without all of these various domains that have been evaluated and considered by the eligibility team. And this raises really two issues. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. But here's the problem. If you go through the evaluation process and you determine that a child is not eligible for special education services under the IDEA, and you haven't assessed in all the comprehensive areas as listed in the PMP, then you're just opening yourselves up to an attack by the parent, saying, how could you have not have qualified my child? You all didn't even conduct the basic comprehensive components to the evaluation. On the flip side, when the parent brings in the 2-page redacted evaluation that the parent had provided by Dr. Quackenbush, it will usually come to a conclusion. Half the information is redacted from it because the parent has decided you don't need to know, and it might not reflect so favorably on the parent. And they say, I give a DSM-5 diagnosis of autism. Well, that's just awesome. That's almost as good as a prescription pad. It's a little better, but it's like the diagnosis. That in and of itself is not sufficient because we have to have these domains. We have to do them in order to make an informed decision on eligibility, because we have to consider all these things for no other reason than, one, the State Department told us that we had to. And number two, and I think this is covered in a slide a little later, is what we're trying to do is we're trying to gather information about the child as a whole. And this is the information that allows the evaluation team to determine what are the educational needs of this student. Okay, this is where you all, as the professionals, are going through it and looking at it and saying, these are the educational needs for the student, because that's what we're going to write an IEP for. We're going to write an IEP, an individualized education program, for a child to address their educational needs. And if we don't have a comprehensive evaluation, and we don't have those components, then we can miss an educational need, okay? Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to follow the procedural safeguards that are put in place in the IDEA. Because parents have an opportunity to file for an impartial due process hearing to contest any of four things. Identification, evaluation, educational placement, or the provision of a free appropriate public education, which is FAPE. You all, has anybody here been through due process? If so, raise your hand. One person. Did you enjoy it? So to use a precise legal term, my experience has been, for school officials, it sucks. Okay, it is horrible. You all are not used to being grilled by a parent or a parent's attorney in a formal hearing setup where you're under oath and they are attacking everything that you've done. Okay, I find it to be kind of fun, but I went to law school and wore my brain, But the other thing is, it is exceedingly expensive in time for you all and for me, which equates to being expensive, very expensive for the school district. Beyond that, if you go to hearing, you have to pay for the court reporter, for the record, which I had a 33-day hearing one time that started in September and ended in December, and the court reporter fees were north of $50,000. And you have to pay the hearing officer's fees. These are all the things that the district has to pay. What does the parent have to pay? Zip. Okay? So we want to make sure that we've dotted our I's, crossed our T's with regard to what we're supposed to do. And this is the one that really bugs me when I initially look at records, and I'm like, it's an autism eval. The very first thing I'm doing, I'm looking at the parent consent, and I'm saying, did you evaluate in all the required domains? And if you didn't, why didn't you do it? Oh, maybe you had done one or two of them 6 months before. Okay, that's fine. What I don't like is, oh, well, that's all the parent really wanted, and that's all we thought we needed. And I'm like, that's not good. It's not good. So, talking about parent-provided evaluations and diagnoses. So, what is the obligation of a MEECS team with regard to an evaluation that a parent brings in? The parent goes, here, I already have an evaluation. It says that my child has autism or a specific learning disability, so we just need to just go straight to the IEP process. And my argument is, no, thank you for providing it to us. Well, you have to follow it. I mean, this is a valid evaluation. No, we don't. We're not required to follow it at all. The only thing that we're required to do is to consider it. Okay, parents have some misunderstandings in this area. Does an outside evaluation keep the district from completing its own comprehensive eval? And the answer to that is unequivocally no, it does not. As a matter of fact, I want school district evaluations. Even if you bring one in, I want the school district to evaluate. Because I cannot tell you how many times a parent has refused to give the school district the opportunity to talk to Dr. Quackenbush about Dr. Quackenbush's evaluation. Well, now what you have that's important is on the piece of paper. No, that's not. We need to talk to them. We need to talk about, okay, you gave the WISC 5, or I may be getting them confused. But what subcomponents, what subparts did you use? What did you consider? Because his or her report might not say what it is. How was the child that day? Had the child been, I had a kiddo one time on the day before evaluation, had spent all night up with his father watching Nightmare on Elm Street 1 through 3. Okay. I've had situations where a kiddo has fallen asleep during the evaluation. And it's just in the report, had difficulty eliciting information from the student. Well, why was that? Or any other of the number of myriad of circumstances. I always want us to complete the evaluations that are necessary for an eligibility determination. Because I know we will always be able to talk to our evaluator. We will always have access to the district's evaluator. And you read some of these reports, and there are gems in there. One kid told an evaluator of the school district in Eastern Oklahoma, Mom said I need to be on an IEP because I need to be able to get a crazy check like everybody else in the family. Okay. I heard a presentation, and I won't say who was giving it. It was talking about the expanded parents' rights in Oklahoma. And I'm like, pardon me, I may be a little jaded here, but can we have a parents' responsibilities in Oklahoma? What do you think the legislature would think about passing something like that? And he said, yeah, not this year. or next year, okay? So, our evaluators, our school psychs, our psychometrists, our perhaps an outside evaluator, if you use them for this purpose, they're going to know and have a real good understanding of what it is that they want to and what they're looking for. And they may want different parts of a Woodcock Johnson that an outside evaluator may not have provided, because in their experience, they think it's going to provide useful information to the district, either to say, this is perhaps an issue for the kiddo, or let's go ahead and rule one out. Okay? So, I like it. The only time, if you receive an outside evaluation, you can elect to accept that as an eligibility evaluation if it has all the components. Because I had a school district one time where a kiddo had a visual impairment, had gone to St. Jude's, and the parent had provided a 77-page report. And there were components that we couldn't even find evaluators to evaluate. And quite frankly, with the credentials of the people at St. Jude's, the district was more than willing to accept that outside evaluation for those certain components. So you can accept them, but you need to be careful and you need to make sure you're comfortable with what was done and who was doing it. Okay, but that can serve as the evaluation for that area. 99% of the cases, outside evaluation is not. Okay, we had a parent bring in an evaluation one time. We were looking at transitioning a child from an IEP to a 504 who had a hearing impairment. And it's because the child had done so well in the hearing impairment, had been able to be compensated with FM devices and the like, that she no longer needed special education services. Really what she needed were accommodations from the 504 plan. And the parent provided an evaluation. And actually in this case, it was an independent educational evaluation. And from an SLP, speech language pathologist. And the school SLP was looking at it, ripped it apart, and determined that she had given the wrong test. It wasn't age norm for this child. It was like 3 through 8, and the child was 10. So it had no. It was an improper evaluation for the child and was unreliable. Some of these things you don't know when you receive an outside evaluation. So I always want us to evaluate. It's a little more expensive, takes a little more time, puts a little more on everybody else's plate, especially the evaluator's plates, but the information obtained from it can be immeasurable with regard to an eligibility decision. I want to make a real quick comment, even though I don't have a separate slide on it. With regard to a child on an IEP, let's say you have a child who has already been qualified and is on an IEP for specific learning disability. And then the parent wants to conduct an evaluation and wants another evaluation. What's the time period for the subsequent evaluation? Anybody want to render a guess? Oh, come on, guys. All right, I'll see a show of hands. How many people think that it's a 45-day period that we talked about? Raise your hands. How many people don't think it's that? Okay. The group that doesn't think it's 45 days is correct. Any evaluation that is conducted after an initial evaluation and after a an eligibility determination has been made and a child's on an IEP is a reevaluation. The 45-day time period only applies, 45 school day time period only applies to initial evaluations. Okay. Again, this is the slide I was talking about. The reason we do the comprehensive eval is because it's required by the State Department. If there's anything I've learned working with school folks for the last 23 years, is that you all are rule followers. Follow the rules. State Department says we have to do it. This is what we have to have. That's what we have to consider. And when it's considered, it needs to be listed on the meetings to show that we actually did it. And again, it helps determine the educational needs of the student to be addressed in the IEP. So this gets us to the meetings. And that's the document that goes through, lists all the testing, the suspected disability category. And then you get toward the end, about a page before the signatures, you have these various questions. And there are really three that are of great importance. Number one, does the student meet the criteria for one or more disability categories under the IDEA? Second one, does the disability impact the student's education? And, this is the key, and because of the disability and its adverse effect on the student's education, the student requires special education services. These are the boxes that you're going to go through and check. If the answer to any of those three questions is no, then the child's not going to be eligible under the IDEA. Here's kind of a personal example. So my son, Max, has ADHD. He also qualified as gifted and talented. Okay? So, because he has ADHD, we had the diagnosis of ADHD, he meets one or more of the criteria for identification under the category of OHI. Okay, that's pretty easy. Does the disability impact his education? No, it does not. And because of it and its impact, does he require special education related services? The answer there is no. He needs to turn in his damn homework when 70% of his grade is homework driven. But does he require special education for services for that? No. And so he was on a speech IEP because he had an articulation issue, and that got resolved, and he got exited. Awesome, that's what we want to do. We want to exit kids off IEPs because we've been successful. That was great. Got him off, and then they said, okay, we're going to put him on an IEP for OHI, other health impaired. And I'm like, no. They were like, what do you mean, Bo? I'm like, he qualifies. I'm like, yes, he qualifies for the disability category, but it's a three-step process. It doesn't adversely affect his education. Adversely affects his ability to turn his homework in. Well, not that, because he's properly medicated. That's really just him. But he doesn't need special education related services. So I'm like, no. He's not going to qualify under the IDEA. They're like, well, what about a 504 plan? I'm like, well, we can look at a 504 plan. And Andrew is going to talk to you about this after me. Because there, the qualifying is the same as the ADA. Does the child suffer mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities? And you look at that without considering the ameliorative effects of medication. So, yes, if he's not medicated, does that cause or impact his impulsivity and his ability to listen, to concentrate? Absolutely. But even then, I said, no, I don't want him on a 504 plan. They're like, what are you doing to us? You're our special ed attorney. Why are you telling us no? I said, I'm telling you no because I'm his parent, and I don't want him on it because he doesn't need it. And I know my son well enough that if he's going to get all these extra accommodations and things, he's going to milk it. And then we're going to be in worse shape than we are. Because when he gets out of Jinx, nobody's going to give it to him about his ADHD. I said, and this was back in 7th grade, and I said, maybe in 9th grade, if we're having some issues, we'll consider it. And they finally fired off the flare in 9th grade and said, I'm having trouble. And I'm like, okay, all right. But it's got to be those three things. You have to qualify under the disability category. You have to fit within that peg. You have to be able to put that peg in that hole. It has to adversely affect the child's education, and by virtue thereof, does he require special education? He or she requires special education services. Okay? Answer of no to any of those boxes is the child doesn't qualify. So we had a child at a large district outside of Oklahoma City where mom had gotten upset with the school, had withdrawn the child from first grade or kindergarten, had decided that she knew how to best educate the child herself because she had consulted the eminent Google, and so she homeschooled him. And then she decided, homeschooling's not for me. And on the door of my office, I have this little thing that says, how's homeschool going? And it's like, great, 2 kids suspended for fighting and 1 teacher fired for drinking on the job. So she brings the kiddo back, and they immediately want to qualify the child. But we're like, wait a sec. Because there's another box, and it's the lower box. And it says the student's educational performance is not based primarily on a lack of appropriate instruction in reading, including the essential components, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary development, reading fluency, including oral reading skills, and reading comprehension, math, or limited English proficiency. So mom wanted this child, mom wanted the child identified as having dyslexia, which is part of specific learning disability. And we said, no. We don't want to evaluate the child now, because when we go through this process, we're not going to be able to say that it's not based primarily on one of these things. Why? Because we haven't seen the child. And so what's going to happen is we're going to go through this, and we're not going to be able to make an eligibility determination because we can't rule it out. Unfortunately, the child's grandfather was an attorney, and we said, look, let us do interventions for this kiddo for the first 9 weeks. Let's get the kid back in school. Let's see if we can get that child to where we want that child to be. Then we'll reconvene after the first 9 weeks. And if the child is not where we expect the child to be, then we'll go ahead and do this process. Because otherwise, I think we're just engaging in futility. Because we're not going to be able to rule out lack of appropriate instruction for this child. And sure enough, they did. The child didn't make the progress that we thought the child would. And in 9 weeks, we started the evaluation, and the child qualified. Yes?
Before you move on, can you clarify for everyone who answers these questions?
Okay. Let's talk about the role of the parent in the IEP process. The cornerstone of the IDEA is parental participation. Okay? We don't have IEPs without meaningful parental participation. But you all are the educational experts, not the parents. You all are licensed professionals in the state of Oklahoma by virtue of your teaching certificates. Okay? I am not a certified teacher. Okay? I'm a parent, and I suffer the disability of being a lawyer. But I am not an educational professional. Determinations like this and an IEP is not New Hampshire at 12:01 on election night, where everybody gets a vote and majority rules. Okay? And there's another slide. See if I can find it. No, I'll just go ahead and we'll get there later. Who has the obligation of providing a free, appropriate public education to a student enrolled at the district? The district or the parent? Anybody? Yeah, the parent has no obligation to provide FAPE in the least restrictive environment. You all do by virtue of the fact that the district receives IDEA flow-through funds, Part B funds, okay? The school district is the only entity in the room that has an obligation to provide FAPE. Okay? Parents presumably know their child best. Parents, at the end of the day, do not make the educational decisions for the child at school. I don't know why they think that they do. I don't think why they believe that you're going to provide an hour and a half of reading instruction to my kiddo during the day. That's what you're going to do. At the end of the day, the obligation of the school district is to draft an IEP that's reasonably calculated to allow the child to receive a meaningful benefit from their education based upon the child's unique needs. Okay, that's the legal obligation. So, story to this point. Had a parent, when the child moved from second grade to third grade, did not want the child to go into the third grade English language arts class. She had convinced herself with her nutty friend and cousin that the child had dyslexia, and by God, Norton Gillingham is what was going to be taught by the school. And the second grade teacher, who she liked, used components of Norton Gillingham. So she wanted her third grader to spend 3/4 of the class period for ELA with the second grade teacher, and then only a quarter with the third grade teacher. Anybody want to guess how well that worked out? Okay. So now I'm at an IDEA mediation. And I'm first getting involved in this. I'm like, okay, guys, we're all alone in the room. I'm like, why didn't we do this? Well, the parent requested it. I'm like, can any of you all raise your right hand as the professional educators Can any of you all raise your right hand under oath and say that this is educationally appropriate for this kiddo? And they go, no. I'm like, then why the hell did you do it? They're like, well, because the parent asked for it. Why didn't you tell the parent no? This is the response I left. We can do that? I'm like, yes, you can do it. You have an obligation to the parent to do it. It is not educationally appropriate for the child. You all have the faith obligation. That is where you are duty bound to say no. Because we don't believe it's educationally appropriate. But they didn't do it. So we spent the next 2 years kind of buying some time so that the 2-year statute of limitations ran on what had happened during his 3rd grade year. We fixed it moving forward. But I wanted there's a 2-year statute of limitation for due process hearings. So we kind of played nice so that that was no longer something that could be complained about. And then the team started asserting itself and saying no to the parent. And the parent was mad. The parent wanted to withdraw her child every day for one class period, for the English language class period, so that he could get private Orton Gillingham services in the town. And we told her, no, you can't do that. And she's like, you can't stop me from withdrawing him for that hour. No, we can't. But we can't write that in the IEP because that would be a shortened school day. And one of the things that the State Department says you can't do is for parents private outside services. So we're like, no. And she looked at me and she said, well, the IEP team can do whatever it wants to do. And I went, no. And my recommendation to the district members of the IEP team is that we don't, because it's specifically prohibited by the state. Did that stop our Energizer Bunny mom? No, but what did? When we provided her a written notice saying that if you continue to do this, your child is going to be ineligible. So he's now in like 6th grade for all school district extracurriculars. And we laid it out. And he was a huge baseball player. So guess who ended up hanging out in his English language arts class? Our kiddo. But no, I mean, we're not going to be able to do it because we can't defend it. It's not educationally appropriate. It's against the rules of the State Department. We're not shortening his school day to accommodate your private outside therapies. Had we written that in, we'd have been in trouble. I mean, it's just, you can't do it. And it wasn't educationally appropriate. He was missing so much by being in that class because he had other services as well. So, example number 2. School district has a 4th grade kiddo. 4th grade. He's 6'2", 210, very low on the spectrum, maybe mid-40s IQ, nonverbal, and had such behavioral issues that he had 2 paraprofessionals assigned to him at all times. Mom decides that for social interaction, it would be best for him to go to the 4th grade regular ed classroom for 30 minutes a day. What does the IEP team do? They wrote it into the IEP. Why? Because mom wanted it. Is there any educational benefit that's going to come about for him being in the fourth grade classroom? None. So the parent files due process, because parent files finds out that the school district hasn't been doing that. Finds out that, yeah, they started it in September, but then, didn't really do it the rest of the year. And the parent claimed a denial of faith, who had failed to comply with the IEP. The parent's attorney did the smartest thing that parents' attorneys do. When they get somebody on the stand, they're not going after the teachers initially, they're going after the parents. And they're asking the parents the question. So they asked the para, did you take him every day? No. Though there were some days that, he was just so agitated we weren't going to do it. There were times that, he would start getting overstimmed in the classroom and we'd have to remove him. What's the longest period of time that you brought him into that you remained in the regular ed classroom? During the entire year? Yeah, let's go with that. 10 minutes. Hearing officer finds a denial of faith because we failed to comply with the IEP. Why did the hearing officer determine that? It's not in the decision, but I'm really confident it's because we tried this at the parents' request. It didn't work. I'll get into this here in a little bit. But then we didn't do anything about it. We didn't come back, hold another IEP team meeting and say, hey, we tried this. Here's our data. We were able to make it a total out of, 3 weeks, we were able to make it 7 days. And the most he was able to stay in the classroom was 10 minutes. This isn't working. So let's go back to the table and determine an appropriate way that we can bring about your desired goal of socialization for him. This was never the appropriate way for social interaction to begin with. We should have brought other regular ed kids to that classroom. But, but we didn't do anything about it, and that was our fault. And I truly believe that's why the hearing officer found that denial of faith. This parent also made 753 recordings on her child's communication device because we didn't provide one for him. Mom did, and she put super secret spyware on it. And so it was lovely listening to 753 recordings that didn't really show that we were doing anything bad, it just wasn't showing that we were doing anything good.
Is Oklahoma a single-party consent state for recording?
Yes. Yes. And we argued that the child could not consent. And a judge in southern Oklahoma, after I sued the hearing officer to keep him out, found that vicarious consent applied, and so long as mom consented, the kid consented. It was a wrong decision, but we let it go because there's an old adage in the law: bad facts make for bad law. So we just let it go. No, it is supposed to be consensus. Okay? The goal of, and thank you for bringing me back to the initial question. The goal is consensus. Okay, I can go down these rabbit trails all day. The goal of an IEPT meeting and eligibility determination is consensus. But at the end of the day, the school district prevails. It's not a vote. at the end of the day, does the school district believe that the child qualifies? Okay. The parent can disagree. She can mark disagree if you find non-eligibility, or the parent can disagree if you find the child eligible. Never quite understood that, but I've seen that sometimes. But no, at the end of the day, in my view, you try to reach consensus, but if you can't, it's a school district, because who has the obligation of providing faith? School district. Same thing with an IEP. If the parent disagrees to parts of it, the parent disagrees to parts of it. If they're school district members of the team that disagree with it, they mark disagreement. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the consensus of the school district, folks. All right, so going back to this eligibility, the term, an eligible child under the IDEA is a child with a disability. And it means that they've been evaluated in accordance with these various sections as having, and this is just the IDEA list of disability categories, and who, by reason thereof, needs special education and related services. Okay? That's the definition of a child with a disability under the IDEA. What is special education? This too is defined in the regulations. It means specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of the child with a disability, including blah, blah, blah. Okay? So it means specially designed instruction. Well, guess what also is defined? Specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate to the needs of the eligible child under this part, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. Again, this is the Max Rainey example. He doesn't need specially designed instruction. That's what special education is.
I had a question about that right there. You were saying he was gifted and talented, but it didn't impede any of his other. What if it did? What if he was gifted and talented in music or art or something like that, but it was impacting his reading and math and social study, all of those areas?
Then the answer to the question would have been yes. I'm sorry?
Would he qualify then like 504? Is that what you're saying? He wouldn't need special?
No, I'm saying this is a kid who is making all A's and B's.
But what if he wasn't?
But if he wasn't,
Right.
the mere fact that he's gifted and talented doesn't mean anything.
That's what I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it means nothing.
If it was impacting
Yes.
some area.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the key. Is it adversely impacting his education? And it wasn't. Okay, so if a student is determined to be eligible, you have to draft the IEP within 30 days of the date of the eligibility determination. This is the date on the means. Okay, this is straight out of the PMP. If the parent refuses, so generally what happens, you qualify a student, then you, usually at that same meeting, the district has prepared a draft IEP for the student. So the parent and the team, you shift from eligibility, yes, he's eligible, let's look at an IEP. In my experience has been, these meetings are usually combined. So we look at the IEP. In order to implement that IEP, the parent has to give the initial consent for special education services. Okay, it's the bottom of the signature page. Right after the parent and the team member signature, parent consents. If the parent doesn't consent, you cannot implement the IEP. It's the initial implementation of special education services. It's like a parent refusal. So I had a district where the district and the parent had gone through and they had drafted this IEP for the kid, but mom was really hung up because she wanted 3 days of speech language services instead of 2, something like that. And she signed the IEP that she disagreed with it, but then she wouldn't sign consent for initial delivery. So we provided written notice to her and said, look, we understand you disagree with this one little part of the IEP, but we can't implement it until you give us consent. We can't implement that which we agree upon. So your child's not going to be getting any of the other services that we agree upon. And the parent kept on sending hateful emails, threatening to go to the State Department. We kept on sending written notices. We cannot do it. We cannot do it. See our previous 2 written notices. We're happy to meet with you to discuss this one little area of disagreement. But why are we not providing the services that we agree that he needs to have? And then finally the parent went in, and then they were able to have a meeting and reach agreement on that one little part. But when I say here, if the parent refuses to provide consent for initial special education services on the IEP, you can't implement it. You just can't. And you can't go to due process to override that. Okay? What if the student's not determined eligible under the IDEA? Again, this is another reason for district evaluations. Because as soon as you make that eligibility determination that the kiddo is not eligible, you immediately need to be thinking about Section 504. Because it's different. It's a different standard. The standard is, does the child have a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities? So you have a 504 eligibility meeting. Ideally, you could do it at the same meeting, but chances are you're not going to have both sets of paperwork. You know, you just kind of shift hats from an IEP eligibility team to a 504 eligibility team. But for every child that you do not qualify under IDEA, you must consider for eligibility under 504. So does everybody understand the relationship between the ADA, Section 504, and the IDEA?
It would be good to review.
All right. So Diane's probably heard this before. I used to do this by looking at a bullseye, archery target, and go with the concentric rings. My wife's a graphic designer, and I was doing this for a presentation, and she said, "Yeah, that just sucks." And I'm like, "Okay, if it's so bad, come up with something better." And threw down the challenge. She said, "Fine, I will." And what she did, she came up with a little better. So think of the ADA as an ocean. Okay? There are some people, we'll just use kids. There are some kids that are going to be able to swim in the ocean. Okay? And if they're able to swim in the ocean, they're covered by the ADA. Because not everybody gets to swim, but just certain kids. In the ocean is an island called 504. Okay? Not everybody who's in the ocean is going to be able to swim to 504 island. But if you can, then you're covered by 504. And because the island's in the ocean, the ADA ocean, you're covered by the ADA as well. Okay? On 504 island is this little beach chair with an umbrella, and it's got a little table, and it's got a little fruity drink with a little umbrella in it. And that chair's called IDEA. Not every kid walking on 504 island is going to be able to sit in that chair. Because remember, you have to qualify under one of the 13 enumerated IDEA disabilities. Not every kid walking on that island is going to be able to sit in the chair. But if you can sit in the chair, then you're covered by the IDEA. Chairs on the island, so you're covered by 504. Islands in the ocean, you're covered by the ADA. Okay? That is the easiest way to think of the relationship. So what you basically said in that determination, hey kid, get out of the chair. You can't sit in the chair. Okay? Now let's make sure that you can walk on the island. And that's what you're looking at in your 504 determination. Did that answer the questions? Keep me honest. Okay.
So you have the student that qualifies for services and a parent refuses to provide
Consent for the evaluation or the IEP?
It says, when a parent refuses to provide consent for initial special education services.
Yes.
Gone through all of the process to determine that they're eligible, but the parent refuses to provide consent for you to implement services.
Yes.
Is that, I understand about the specialized education, but would that kind of fall under, as far as providing, not specialized services, but providing some type of, I guess the word would be accommodation for that student, as it would for a student that you suspect they have a disability?
Okay. Hopefully this will answer your question. You cannot implement the IEP if the parent won't give consent. So that child's not entitled to any of those services. You would then move to Section 504 and make an eligibility determination. The parent's going to have to consent to 504 services. If the parent doesn't consent, then you're not doing anything for the kid, other than what you would normally do for a regular ed kid. Because they're not a special ed kid.
Okay, I understand, I think I understand that, but if you suspect that a student has a disability and they've not manifested, although you suspect that they have a disability, are you not required to do anything for that kid? I'm not saying provide specialized services, but there are things that you can do.
There are things that you can do, but you're going to want to bring that and request parent consent to evaluate the child. If the parent refuses to give consent because, I'm not going to let you test my kid, then you can either provide written notice saying, we offered to do it, the parent refused. We're not moving forward. Or, which I've never had happen, the district can go the expense to file due process against the parent and have the hearing officer order consent for the evaluations. Most districts elect not to spend the money of going to due process to override a lack of parent consent. What you can't go to due process over is to compel the initial consent for special ed services on an IEP. Yes?
Would you continue to do intervention services with the student that the parent refused an initial?
I would continue to be the best teacher I could be for the child. And I would continue to come back and have the conversations with the parent and say, look, we are continuing to try these things in the classroom, but your child is not succeeding. Will you please reconsider consent? But there are going to be those parents that are just no. And then, you do what a good teacher is going to do. Ready to move on? All right. Pre-staffing of meetings. How many of you all go to pre-staffings? How many of you all want to go to pre-staffings? How many of you all think pre-staffing is bad? Huh? I know, it's just an apathetic group. Okay. There is nothing wrong with pre-staffing. Okay? There is nothing wrong for the district members of the team to come together to discuss the child and to discuss and get a consensus as what are the best educational options for the child. Okay? What you have to be concerned about is what's referred to as predetermination, where you are making a decision ahead of time and you're denying the parent the ability to meaningfully participate. Okay? But when a parent says, no, you can't meet without me to discuss my child, you can say, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Okay? So this is a quote from one of my favorite cases, Kevin Neff. But it goes, as an initial matter, nothing in GOS precludes school personnel from discussing a disabled child's case before a formal meeting. But other case law does make clear that the school district has already made up its mind before the parents ever get involved. It's denied them an opportunity for meaningful input, predetermination. Accordingly, school officials must come to the IEP table with an open mind and not make a final determination regarding a disabled child before fully discussing the issues with the child's parents. This does not, however, require school officials to come to the table, IEP table, with a blank mind. Okay? The district's court's opinion in Doyle is instructive on this distinction. There, the court found no error in the school's research of particular placement options for the disabled child before the IEP team meeting. The court noted that while the school district must not finalize its placement decision for an IEP meeting, it can and should have given some thought to that placement. Thus, the court found no unlawful predetermination of the child's placement, finding instead that the parents fully participated in drafting the IEP before any placement options were considered, and that the school was receptive and responsive to the parents' suggestions throughout the formulation of the IEP. It is no different than preparing a draft IEP for the team's consideration before a meeting. That is not predetermination. That is being efficient. That is allowing you all an opportunity as educational professionals to discuss what you believe to be the best options for the child. You just have to walk into the IEP team meeting with an open mind and be willing to consider if the parent says, well, I appreciate that, but here's why I don't think that's going to work. And they tell you, okay? It is not predetermination to deny a parent request. Okay? Parent participation does not mean I get what I want. It means a reasonable opportunity to be involved in the process and have some decision-making authority. You may disagree, which is fine. Parents may disagree. They disagree all the time. School district is the educational professionals. They're going to do what's educationally appropriate for the child. And not doing what's educationally appropriate for the child, that you know is not educationally appropriate, simply because a parent wants you to do that, is not fine. Okay? All right. So, determination of education services. One of the most neglected parts of IEPs that I see are objective statements. Okay? Objective statements are supposed to provide an academic functional snapshot of the student as of the time the IEP is written. Okay? Oftentimes I read objective statements and I don't even know from it what the child's disability is. What disability category are they qualified for? Because a hearing officer, when they look at an IEP, that objective statement is going to be the snapshot. And it should tell them what is relevant regarding the child. Because it forms the baseline for determining whether or not there has been progress made during the course of the time that the IEP is in effect. If you don't have a baseline, you don't know what that baseline is, then you can't determine whether or not the child made progress. It provides objective evidence and explanations as to any impediments in the child's education. Okay? And then I added this in. An IEP is not a contract. Have any of you all ever heard a parent say, well, this is a contract, you haven't followed it, and therefore you violated my child's rights? I have. Okay. An IEP is not a guarantee of success. An IEP is written prospectively. Okay? So when you judge the merits of an IEP, you're determining at the time as it was written, was it reasonably calculated to confer a meaningful educational benefit on the child based upon the child's unique circumstances. Okay? Doesn't mean that the child's going to meet all of the goals in the IEP, but that's okay. You know, is it sufficiently ambitious to allow the child to do that? There could be a myriad of reasons as to why the child does not meet all the goals. That does not mean that a failure of the child to meet all the goals within the 1 year of the annual IEP means that there's been a violation of FAPE. Okay? IEPs are not contracts. Or to have contracts, you have to have offer, acceptance, and consideration. Okay? There is no consideration. And that's why it fails as a contract, because we're obligated to do it. There's no meeting in the minds. I mean, we have to do it. So from a technical legal standpoint, that's why it's not a contract. And there's case law to that effect. Okay, so this was a school district out in far western Oklahoma, and I saw the objective statement that said Samuel's low reading ability and processing speed will hinder him in every subject area. His math teacher reports that he tries hard in class and stays after school for tutoring. I'm like, okay, I know nothing about this kid. I know he has low reading ability and processing. That's all I know. So we went back and forth. And the district came up with Samuel was first enrolled during the 17-18 school year. This was important because this IEP was during his first year. He was in the former district for those states. He didn't receive ESY from the former district. The benchmark evaluations for star reading given was a grade equivalent of 6 points. So now we're giving evaluation information on the child. He was fully mainstreamed during his 8th grade year and served under the disability category of SLD, but there are multiple components of SLD. Let's say what they are: reading skills, reading comp, math calc, and math problem solving. And then we said what his grades were in the first semester. In fourth quarter grades may be lower due to absences due to illness. Okay? Which one of those tells you more about the kid? Yeah. It's better. It's not necessarily the best, but it tells us a disability category. It tells us he hadn't been at our district until 17-18. It said where he was in February of 18 during the second semester. It's talking about his placement. He was fully mainstreamed. And it shows his grades, and then shows and explains why his fourth quarter grades may be lower, and that's due to absences. So this was written probably in April of 18, okay? This gives me a baseline to which in another year, I can go back and we can look at the star scores, and we can see it's their progress. That shows that there's been some success with regard to the IEP. You can't do that with the other objective statement. So, how many of you all were in SPED when there were the SEES forms? A lot of you. So, I remember looking at IEPs, and you had a lot to say, and you just had that little box. And so the writing would get really, really small, and then it'd go at the side of the page, and then go on the back of the page. And it always struck me as kind of funny. I'm like, why don't you just say "see attached" and get a notepad and just write out as much as you need to. Okay. Ed Plans gives you more of the ability to do it. You need to put in the sufficient information that's needed. You know, I've seen 1-page written notices for meetings, and I've seen 4-page written notices for meetings. And I had a special ed teacher who was like, well, Bo, why don't you just go ahead and write it anyway, because you're just going to change what I write. I don't know why we're having to do this. This is the kid whose mom wanted her having Gordon Gillingham in 2nd grade. And I said, because Terry, these serve as the minutes of what happened. And in 2 years, if the parent files due process, you're not going to remember. Because I'm not going to remember. Nobody's going to remember. And then we went to due process. And she came up and she started going through all the documents and started reading all the written notices. And went, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah, I forgot that we were going to do this. Mom suggested this. We said, okay, we can try it. She's like, I'll never complain again. Because it was for Woody, for due process. It was for security blanket. Because we had sufficiently detailed the main points of what was proposed and implemented and what was refused and why. And sure enough, during that hearing, the parent was like, why did you put dyslexia in the objection statement? And Terry said, because you wanted me to. It doesn't really make any difference. He served under SLD. And she said, well, I'm just the parent. I'm not a certified teacher in Oklahoma. And I looked at the assistant superintendent and I said, I told you she'd say that. I told you at the end of the day, she would say, well, you won't make these decisions, but I'm just the parent. Why did you listen to me? And that's what had happened in 3rd grade. Okay. These are kind of the questions that I was asking earlier. Who's the only party with the legal obligation to provide FAPE? The district. Who's responsible for using an appropriate curriculum? The district. Who's responsible for drafting an appropriate IEP for a student? The district. Who has the requirement to educate the child in the least restrictive environment? The district. Who are the licensed educational professionals? The school district teachers. Who does not have the right to dictate a particular educational methodology? The parent. So these are a couple of things that I toss in written notices sometimes. Recognizing that parents, no matter how well motivated, don't have the right under IDEA to compel the school district to provide a specific program or employ a specific methodology for the education of their disabled child. Case that's from 10th Circuit, our controlling federal circuit court. Case law is clear that parents are not entitled to dictate educational methodology or compel the school district to supply a specific program for their disabled child. That's 6th Circuit. Okay? Parents also don't have the right to dictate personnel. Oh, I don't like that SLP. I want this one. I want this teacher and not this one. This teacher said something mean to me. I don't want them for my child. No. No. If you can show me how using that individual is going to result in a denial of faith for your child because perhaps they're not qualified, then that's a different question. But this bit that parents get to hold the veto and trump over everything is so mistaken, and it is not the case. I'm much beloved by parents in the state of Oklahoma. Okay? This is key. Okay? I tell teams all the time, there should be a natural tension between the school district and parents. I'm good with that. Parents should be pushing the district to give as much services that can be given for their child. And you all give until you reach a point where, no, we're not going to give anymore. That's that natural tension. I've found that where you get into problems is when you have disparate power, where the parent, so long as the parent barks, the district gives them whatever they want. And then when you finally say no, that's when they really get mad. And they have their extinction bursts. And they make it painful for everybody. And I've had many a phone call with the sped director where I said, okay, Lori, you know how you got here, don't you? Yes, say it. We didn't say no early enough. I'm like, that's right. You've conditioned the parent that they're going to be able to get whatever they want, even if you don't think it's appropriate or necessary for the child. Least restrictive environment. Okay, what is LRE? It's from a 10th Circuit case, and enacting the IDEA, Congress explicitly mandated through the least restrictive environment requirement that disabled child be educated in regular classrooms to the maximum extent possible or appropriate. LRE mandate provides that removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occur only when the nature or severity of the disability of the child is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. Educating children in the least restrictive environment in which they can receive an appropriate education is one of the IEA's most important substantive requirements. Thus, the LRE is a specific statutory mandate. It is not, as the district court in this case mistakenly believed, a question about educational methodology. Okay? So when I talk about FAPE, that's why you're hearing me saying FAPE in the least restrictive environment. Okay? Meaningful educational benefit in the least restrictive environment. If it's not in the least restrictive environment, there's a denial of FAPE. Okay? So, what is LRE? Least restrictive environment, think of a pole. It is a continuum of placement. At the top of the pole is the least restrictive environment. That's the kiddo is being educated in the regular ed classroom with his peers. Okay? At the very bottom is the most restrictive, residential placement. Or in the case of the State Department, they say home-based services. I disagree with it, psychologists disagree with it, but that's kind of what they say. There are various degrees on that pole, okay? It may be that a kiddo, because of their educational needs to be in a resource room for an hour or one period a day, okay? So they go down a little bit on that least restrictive environment compendium. Okay, so, but that's what's least restrictive for them. Okay, because they're not going to succeed in the regular classroom. They need that. There are going to be those kids that need to be in a self-contained classroom because of the nature of their disability. That's more restrictive. Okay? But LRE is specific to each child. And I think you all know this. When you look at a child, that child's least restrictive environment is what is necessary in order for us to provide FAPE to the student. Okay? It's not static. It can change, just as kids change. Just as they grow older, and then they get into puberty, and they change. Their behaviors may change. Things may change outside of school that affect their abilities. But the key is that it is individualized as to each student. There is no such thing as an LRE tied to a disability category. Okay? I don't see this a lot, but I like to remind everybody, LRE is kid specific. What may be LRE for one kid with ADHD may not be for the next kid. But it's the determination made by the IEP team. Certainly my 6th to 4th grader, his least restrictive environment was not going into the 4th grade regular ed class for anything. Creating measurable goals. I stole this from somebody who provided it to an IEP team because that's what lawyers do. They find things that they like and then they appropriate them. But I'm giving credit to the unnamed person from Philadelphia who did this. You see a lot of complaints with regard to goals and arguing that a goal is not measurable. This did what I thought was a really fine job of addressing that. We said that there are 5 components to measurable goals. There's condition. That's the setting, accommodations, and description of the assessment method and manner in which progress towards goals measured. Criteria, how much, how often, and to what standard behavior must occur in order to demonstrate that the goal's been reached. The name of the student, behavior, where the student is currently functioning with specific skill that the measurable goal is addressing, and baseline. This does not make any sense until you see this. Here's an example. Given a reading passage at the 5th grade level and 10 question multiple choice worksheet, the student will answer 9 out of 10 comprehension questions from the reading passage on 9 consecutive weekly prayers. Okay, that's the goal. The condition, giving a reading passage at a 5th grade level. The criteria, 9 out of 10 comprehension questions. The name of the student, behavior, answer the comprehension problems. Baseline, 2 out of 10. Okay, because you've written in the goal what the baseline is. You're telling in the goal where this kiddo is now. Okay, that is a measurable goal. It's kind of formulaic, I like it. But if you write goals like this, they will always be measurable. Okay, timeline reviews of IEPs. The teacher of record owns the IEP and its contents. I had a teacher come in to a classroom in November. I'm sitting in a meeting in May with a parent and a parent's advocate, and the parent's advocate is going nuts over these goals that are being inappropriate. The teacher looks at the advocate and says, I agree with you. I didn't write these, but I don't think they're appropriate either. I looked at the special education director who was busy staring a hole through the floor and wouldn't look at me. Okay? I'm sorry. After 6 months, you own it. Okay? You're responsible for it. You're the final teacher of record. If you think that it sucks, fix it. Okay? Whenever something isn't working, change the IEP. Call an IEP team meeting. This is the going into the 4th grade classroom. It's not working. Collect the data to show the parent why it's not working. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be, we tried it for 3 weeks. We only made it 5 days, and the longest lasted was 10 minutes. That's the data. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes?
What if there isn't a place for them to go? What if the general ed classroom is the only place for them? There is no other option. There's no self-contained, there's no place for them.
Is that the child's least restrictive environment?
No.
Then there's an issue that needs to be raised and addressed.
Okay.
Collect good
Who
data.
do we raise it with?
I'm sorry?
Who do we raise it with?
I'd raise it with your site principal and I'd raise it with your special ed director.
Okay.
Collect good data to establish progress toward goals. Guys, the days of teachers being believed on the witness stand at a due process hearing simply because you're teachers is over. Okay? It's all data driven. Show me the documentation. Show me how we made progress. Show me the scores. Show me the increase in Lexile scores from August to May. Show it to me. Show me progress. Show me the data. Okay? Never deny meaningful parent participation. Cardinal sin. Cardinal sin. You can have the greatest IEP, and if you deny parental participation, you will lose every time. Doesn't mean that you have to enact all the changes by the parent. Okay? Don't make changes to an IEP that you as the educational professionals do not believe are appropriate. Just don't. It may
Even if
cause.
the district says that we have to?
Well, at the end of the day, that's going to be a district decision to live with or not. You may be in disagreement with it, but at the end of the day, it's the district's call. Okay? Ensure knowledge by district staff of all accommodations and document this. I believe it is appropriate for every special education teacher with kiddos on their caseload who have accommodations to go visit each and every one of the teachers and make sure that they've been provided the accommodations and that they understand it and that they sign off on a document so stating. I met with them on this day. The accommodations were provided to me and explained, and I didn't have any questions. Okay? This ignorance of accommodations of a child on an IEP will not protect the district at all. And it's the special education teachers and their principals who are responsible for making sure that those accommodations get filtered down to the teachers who are actually teaching. Okay? The IEP team in the IEP determines the accommodations for the child. Once those accommodations are determined, whether they be for the classroom or whether they be for state testing, are required to be followed. Okay? If you think that an accommodation is inappropriate, then it needs to be raised with the appropriate people and it be considered, if the district believes it's necessary, at an IEP team meeting with the parent to change the IEP. Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you put on an IEP that the child is going to receive these accommodations during state testing, that's what needs to be followed. Now, what that may indicate is there needs to be more communication between testing coordinators and those drafting the IEPs to resolve any of those issues. But if it's in the IEP for a state testing accommodation and you don't provide it, then you're going to eat a State Department complaint and lose it. The time to determine the appropriateness is at the time that the IEP is written. And if you know of an issue with an accommodation prior to state testing, then you need to bring it up so it can be discussed by the team. But if it's in the IEP, you've got to follow it. How much time do I have?
It's got 45 minutes. Well,
Really?
30 minutes.
Okay. Awesome. I'm gonna have time for this one. You guys are really not peppering me all that much. Either have sat through one of these before with me and said, here it is again, or it's just early in the morning. All right, let's talk about discipline. I love discipline. I field more discipline questions than almost anything else. Okay? When we're talking about discipline, we're talking about a disciplinary change of placement. Okay? So this is just kind of a checklist. First, you determine if there is a change of placement. If there is, then you conduct a manifestation determination review. That's what MDR is. You have to complete it within 10 school days. The MDR team, which can be the same as the IEP team, includes the parent, reviews relevant information and student conduct giving rise to the discipline. And then it makes a determination. The conduct either was or was not a manifestation of the child's disability. If it was a manifestation, then following the rule, we're not going to hammer a kid for conduct that he or she can't control, or because of our failure. We're going to put them back in the then current educational placement. Okay? We're not going to discipline. We're going to determine functional behavior assessment, behavior intervention plan issues. If there's no manifestation, the IEP team determines what the interim alternative educational setting is going to be, and the IEP team determines educational services. Okay, we'll go through this a little more. So what is a change of placement? 300.536 of the regulations. For the purposes of removals of a child with a disability, remember, definition, child of a disability, from the child's current educational placement, the change of placement occurs if the removal is for more than 10 consecutive school days, or the child's been subject to a series of removals that constitutes a pattern because of such additional, because a series of removals total more than 10 school days in a school year, because the child's behavior is substantially similar to other incidents, because of such other factors as the length of each removal, the total amount of time the child's been removed, and the proximity of the removal to one another. The public agency, the school district, determines on a case-by-case basis whether a pattern of removals constitutes a change of placement. Okay? That's what triggers a manifestation determination review, is a disciplinary change of placement. Everybody with me? This is usually where I start losing people. Okay.
Let's say that you have, notification. What does that mean?
Okay, so are they going home and going online? Yes, that's a change of placement. I mean, the child's educational placement is in the classroom as set forth in his IEP, his or her IEP. You're now pulling that child away from their peers. You're providing educational services, you're just doing it in a different setting, but you're doing it at home. Yes, that is a change of placement. Okay? If you have in-school detention, where that child still has access to their non-disabled peers, like I represent Broken Arrow, they have a huge ISD They may have a couple of hundred kids in there a day. Okay? Well, it's a big district and they're broken up. Spirited children. But they want the kids in school. They don't want them at home. They want them there. Okay? But if you've got a kiddo, let's just say we've got a kid with a learning disability who's spending 80% of the day in regular ed classes and he's got the other 20% pullout. Okay? If he's in ISD with his non-disabled peers, that is not a change of placement. His special education teacher is coming to him to provide the instruction. Okay? It is simply a different regular education class setting. May not be the one he prefers, but he doesn't get to determine that. You know, he shouldn't have been vaping in school. Okay? Is that a change of placement? No. That is not a change in his educational placement as set forth in his IEP. It is a change in where he would normally receive it. But no, it's not a change of placement. Yes, ma'am. Well, then that needs to be worked out. I mean, the child is still entitled to the special education services in his IEP. Well, you're talking about where the child's going to receive educational services. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about the quantity of the services that the child's going to receive during the time. Remember, we're just looking at, does this discipline, is that going to constitute a change of placement? Okay, special ed teacher can come down and see him for, 10 minutes. He may not get the minute for minute that he would otherwise have. Okay, but he's still being provided that. And that child may be able to get out of ISD and go to a resource room if necessary. But then they're going back to the setting. Okay? Yeah? Detention. If the child still has the ability to interact with their non-disabled peers. If in-school detention means sitting alone in a classroom by herself, yes, that is a change of placement. Yes. Yes. Because I'm going to argue that being in ISD doesn't constitute a change of placement. And thus, even if the child's in ISD for 20 days, there hasn't been a removal of the child from their educational placement for more than 10 consecutive school days. Okay?
Can you add, unless they're not receiving special education services?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to need to provide those services as listed on the IEP. So you can't ship them off to ISD and then leave them alone and not have them receive special ed services, receive related services, whatever their IEP calls for. You can't have that. But so long as you are still providing the services set forth in the IEP, then yes.
So that is a special education teacher having to set ISD
Could be.
So there has to be some type of services provided for the students, as long as it follows the guidelines and get their IEP.
Yes, they need to be consistent with the services that's set forth in the IEP.
Right, and what I was gonna say, if it's specific, it's co-teaching 4 times a day for each of his 4 subjects, and he's an ISD, and a co-teacher is not going in there for that amount of time, he's not doing his service. Or if it's a direct instruction kiddo, and he's not being able to go to a direct instruction for that 40 minutes for algebra 2, or whatever. That's just what I was.
Yeah. So on the co-teaching issue, the co-teaching, it's different than collaboration. So it's not a collaborative process between the SPED teacher and the regular ed teacher. I think so long as a SPED teacher is going a number of times that would equate to the 40 minutes during the day to work with him, then I think you're providing 40 minutes of service. You're just not providing it necessarily in a chunk. You know? How much of that time in the co-teaching is that special ed teacher really spending with the kid? I mean, providing direct instruction. I think so long as the direct instruction component is appropriate and it's the same, then I think you're okay. I would argue that you're okay because we're not denying the child any services. You know, a kid could have SLP services for 20 minutes per week. I know at Jinx, when Max had speech therapy services, the speech path would pull him out for 5 minutes every 4 days. You know, because she said I just found it more beneficial to work with him and just pop in and pull him out for 5 minutes. So he was getting the 20 minutes per week, it just wasn't in that chunk. Or maybe working with other students at the time. Yes, ma'am. Well, no, because the IEP is not determining the specific classroom. The IEP team is determining how much time in the regular education placement. So, no. There's a lot of nuance in this. Okay? And that's the thing. So, if you have a change of placement, so remember, a removal for more than 10 consecutive school days, or a pattern. So I had this situation pop up one time. I had a student, what was she doing? I think she was smoking cigarettes, and she got a 5-day suspension, out of school suspension in the fall. And they're really anti-cigarettes in this little eastern Oklahoma town. 5 days is a long time to spend, to allow a child to have quality time with mom and dad during the week. But, and then in the spring, I never met her, but I picture her as just this kind of hippie flower child. She decided the school just wasn't appropriate for her that day and took the day off and rambled around the weeds. And I don't know, maybe she was smoking other things. I don't know. But she got a 7-day suspension. And so the question was, we're over 10 days. Do we have to provide? Or really, does that constitute a pattern? And I went, well, let's go back on it, guys. Is that a pattern? I mean, we have 2 separate removals, 5 months apart. One's for 5 days, one's for 7 days. Yeah, it's 12, but neither one is for more than 10 consecutive school days. So we know it's not the first one. We know it's not removal for more than 10 consecutive school days. So that one goes out. But does it constitute a pattern? Because a series of removals total more than 10 school days in a year. That's true, it does. Because the child's behavior is substantially similar to the behavior of prior incidents. Yeah, I'm not thinking that. Because of such additional factors such as the length of the removal, the total amount of time the child's been removed in the proximity. It's 5 months apart. You know, I can argue that the length of the removals are appropriate. This is what every student gets, but not inordinate. Total amount of time the child's been removed. Okay, it's 12 days, but, you know, district made the case-by-case determination that it constituted a pattern. So no manifestation determination because no change placement. Okay? Now, I got called in late on a due process hearing where a district had suspended a kid who was, he was very free-spirited and liked to tell his assistant principal and his teachers really what he thought. That's probably the nicest way I can say that. In between August and March, he'd been removed 42 days. Okay? Principal was sad. Every one of those removals was for 10 days or less. They were usually Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay? You know, I call that respite care for teachers. Okay. And I got into the due process, and there was never a manifestation determination with regard to this. And I got into it, and I'm like, okay, we're going to go down in flames. Our plane has been shot up. The engines are on fire. We are going down. I'm going to try to salvage this as I can. And I call this pattern of removal, I call it the principal rule. Because Congress is smart enough to realize principals are sneaky and smart. They're going to figure this out as long as I keep them for 10 days and under. I don't have to go through this manifestation business. And so that was pattern. It was all about the same thing. It was all about talking back, being disrespectful. You know, there was one almost every week for some period of time. And in the law we have what's referred to as a straight face contest or test. If you can't say it with a straight face, then you're going to lose. I couldn't say that wasn't removable with a straight face. So timing in the NDR, as we said, 10 school days for a change replacement. When does a manifestation occur? It occurs when the conduct was caused by or had a direct and substantial relationship to the child's disability as determined by the team, or there was a failure by the district to implement the IEP, because that was on us. If it is a manifestation, you're required to conduct a functional behavior assessment unless a previous FBA was conducted and to implement a behavior intervention plan for the student. Let's keep them from doing what they're doing. If there is a behavior intervention plan that covers this kind of conduct, then we need to determine if we need to modify it. This is an IEP determination. And then we're going to return the child to the kiddo's current educational placement where they were 5 minutes before they offended. Unless the parents in the district agree to a change of placement as part of a modification to the behavior intervention plan. It must, the only way you're going to be able to change the placement, because I've fought this with the State Department, is if it is part of a modification to a behavior intervention plan. That's where it's got to be made. Okay. If it's not, then the student's disciplined the same as kiddos without disabilities. Okay, if it's not a manifestation, they're disciplined like regular ed kids. They have those same appeal rights, short-term and long-term. This would be long-term suspension rights that all kids have. Okay? If it's not a manifestation, the IEP team determines the interim alternative educational setting. And that's where the child will receive educational services during the disciplinary removal. And the IEP team determines the appropriate services required during the disciplinary removal. It's oftentimes referred to as modified FAPE. It's not going to be necessarily what's written in the IEP, but you've got to provide those special ed related services that will allow the child to progress toward their IEP goals, albeit in a different setting where those services are provided. Okay, subsequent conduct with discipline that is less than or equal to 10 consecutive school days. If no change of placement, i.e. pattern, because we're not going to get into the first one because it's not more than 10 days. School personnel in consultation with one of the teachers determines the services needed so the student can continue to receive educational services in the general curriculum, albeit in another setting. Maybe home with mom and dad. Subsequent conduct with discipline greater than 10 consecutive school days, you're going through the MDR process again. Weapons, drugs, and severe bodily injury. Andrew, tell me if I'm stepping on time. So you can remove a child to an interim alternative educational setting for not more than 45 school days without regard to manifestation if the conduct involves a weapon, a controlled substance, or illegal drug, or severe bodily injury. Okay? So before you, no, there's a, after my presentation, there's a good story on this I can tell, but I'm not telling. Definition of a weapon and CFRs, just refer you back to a different provision of Title 18. And there's the definition of what constitutes a weapon. Except that the term does not include a pocket knife with a blade of less than 2.5 inches in length. So if you're suspending kids and a kid's got a knife, please do me the favor of taking the knife and putting a ruler next to the blade and taking a picture of it, because if that knife ever goes back to the parent and you don't have a picture of it, I guarantee you that the knife that you get back, and then the parent says the student had, and they will swear forever on this, is going to have a blade of less than 2.5 inches. Seen it. Definition of a controlled substance or illegal drug. And finally, definition of severe bodily injury. It doesn't mean a bruise or a pencil stick in the arm. It means a bodily injury that involves a substantial risk of death, extreme physical pain, protracted and obvious disfigurement, or protracted loss or impairment of the function of a bodily member, organ, or mental faculty. It's severe.
On the controlled substance, does that include a student who has a marijuana card? It's illegal federally, but not state.
Well, I don't think the child is legally possessing it at school. So I would argue that it does.
We have a board policy that says you can't have it.
Special circumstances, real quickly,
We have a board policy.
remember the removal
Called it not.
is more than 10 consecutive school days, manifestation, termination. Under the special circumstances, you still have to do it, because if you're putting them out for 45 days, that's more than 10 consecutive school days. You have to conduct the manifestation determination, but the outcomes are irrelevant for the discipline to be imposed, the removal. But because it does constitute a change of placement under 536, it still requires you to go through the FBA input process. So yes, you still have to do it. Explaining to a parent that, yeah, we're gonna do this and it's a manifestation of your child's disability, but it doesn't make any difference when you do what we want. It's always an interesting conversation. IEP team determines interim alternative educational setting during that up to 45 school day removal. The IEP team determines educational services and the IEP considers the FBA input. On the slide. Oh, I'm done. Yes.
We have always said, because we had a significant issue years ago, about those 10 days. So when we get close to those 2 days, we do have a manifestation determination, and we do a statement, because I don't want everybody to come back and say, well, those said.
No.
So I just wanna make sure it's clear that we can't, and I know you touched on it, but we can't say, oh, this was disorderly conduct, but this was a slide, but this was, you know, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah. Rule of thumb, guys. When you're gonna change placement for disciplinary reason, and it's gonna be, and you're gonna hit the 11th day or beyond, provide the child a manifestation determination. Okay? Whether it's required or not. Okay? And the reason for that is you will never get in trouble for providing a student more rights than the student may have. This is protecting yourself and erring on the side of caution. Okay? Just when you hit that 11th day, know that suspension is going to be the 11th day total in that school year. You're conducting a manifestation determination on it. Even if the kid's been out 3 days and now you're going to put them out for 8 days, give them the manifestation determination. It will keep you out of trouble, and it will allow you all not to have to spend quality time with me. And that should be incentive enough for you all to do.
I'm sorry, real quick. You said 10 consecutive days, and then in there you said on the 11th day. Those 11 days not be consecutive, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I just want clarification.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, out of the total number of days that you've removed the child from their current educational setting for the school year, we just start back from the beginning of the school year when you have a suspension that's going to exceed the total days for the year of 10, whether it's 11, 12, 15, 25, conduct the manifestation determination. That makes sense?